Welcome everyone to the Miss Art World podcast. I am your host, Catherine, with my co-host, Samuel.
What up, Art World?
And today we have Caitlin Mary Margarett with us, who is going to be performing at Satellite with me. Well, not with me. She has her own performance, but she's also performing at Satellite too. So welcome, Caitlin.
Hello.
So Caitlin, you are from Madison, Wisconsin. You were born and raised there. Oh, not Wisconsin. Wait, Minnesota?
Yeah, I'm kind of like, I'm a Midwesterner in the most liminal sense. Yeah, I was born in Minnesota, but I lived the longest in Iowa. And I just moved to Madison for my first year of graduate school, actually. I'm going to UW-Madison.
Gotcha. You're getting your MFA in 4D.
Yes, yeah.
And then you have your BFA in performance art and a BA in art history from the University of Northern Iowa.
Yes.
And then most of your work is rooted in durational performance practice, but are you currently doing ceramic, or is that part of your practice that you've done for a while?
Yeah, so I have done ceramics longer than I've done performance. I think I've been a ceramic artist probably for almost a decade now, which is kind of weird to think about, but I utilize ceramics always in the service of performance. It's never really as a standalone thing. It's always something that I end up making that elevates a performance or serves it. My performances are very object oriented and very much dependent on tools in order to convey certain meanings and to create settings. So for a really long time, I was making tile. And for the performance I'm doing in Miami, as well as kind of generally, I've moved into these huge like bodily vessels that are about the size of my torso.
That you make out of ceramic?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, no way.
Yeah. So it's like these big stoneware vessels that I wrap my tiny little arms around and carry around, and they usually have something in them. I've recently been filling them with kind of brackish, dirty water, and moving them in video pieces, moving them through prairies and polluted areas that are supposed to be protected by the city, but haven't been, the city being the places I have been living. And in this newer work that's going to be at Miami, it's going to be very much in that vein. But we can get there. We can slowly meander our way towards that, I suppose.
And you're performing December 4th on Saturday at 2 p.m. Again, it's at the Satellite Art Show in Miami with Performances Alive. So I don't know if we want to talk about your history first, or if we want to talk about the performance that's coming up.
Let's talk about performance and then go back.
Okay. Do you want to share a little bit about the concept of the performance that you are doing coming up?
Yeah, so this piece is called For the Love of God, which is kind of tongue-in-cheek in the sense that I say that a lot, usually in exasperation. And especially when I'm reading about really poor city management and really poor city management policy, especially around where I had been previously living, which was Cedar Rapids, Iowa. They had sold 20,000, or not 20,000, forgive me. They had sold 20 acres of prairie to this company in this area that they had rezoned from being a prairie pollinator zone to being an industrial zone so that they could put a rail yard in. And I think over the last year, it was just so many people, including myself, like screaming into the night, just like, for the love of God, why? This is such poor city management. This area floods every single year. Why would you do this? And also 20 acres of prairie eradicated. So idea behind the work really is rooted in this area being destroyed, but also the 2020 derecho, which totally decimated where I was living. Cedar Rapids in August, I think it was August 10th of 2020, was hit by this massive windstorm called a derecho that blew through. It was like 140-mile-per-hour winds. It was basically a land hurricane, and it got no coverage because it was the height of the election season. So 93% of the homes in Cedar Rapids had significant damage. Iowa lost 7 million trees. We lost like
Wow, that's a lot
37
of trees.
That's a lot of trees. We lost like 37% of our tree canopy in our urban tree canopy. I think, I don't have the exact number, but I think Cedar Rapids lost like 400,000 trees. I think it might be higher. But so in the performance piece itself, I have audio from my own recordings of sitting in my basement listening to the derecho blowover, as well as different clips from media coverage, the very little media coverage that it got, as well as some other clips that people had posted that I know. And so I have this audio, this swirling audio playing as I move through this space, which has like 3 intersecting sand rings with a big blue house that hangs in the middle. And I have these big pillar-like ceramic forms, which are filled with that brackish water I talked about. And I basically am going to be slowly flooding the space with this audio playing. And I'm probably, I haven't picked the hymn just yet, but I'm going to be singing a hymn about, from this Methodist hymnal that I've been using for my 100 Days project coming up, about God being a gentle and loving God while this audio plays. So the work is deeply personal, but it's also fiercely universal, especially as we kind of brace for the climate crisis and it's snowballing. So yeah, I'm really excited to be presenting that in a space like Miami, because I feel like Florida, if anything, knows what it's like to deal with hurricanes. But I also think, you know, we're used to spaces like Florida having hurricanes and kind of weather that is unpredictable and hard to make sense of in terms of its intensity. But we're not used to spaces like Iowa having hurricanes, or we're not used to spaces like that needing elevation in this very specific way of like, this is not normal, this is not supposed to be happening in the Great Plains. So I'm excited to be bringing that kind of content to a space like Art Week, because I think it's very easy for spaces like that to be kind of saturated with solipsism and kind of the banal in a way that doesn't actually.
Can we go back? What's solecism?
Solipsism, like selfishness and like kind of like this self-absorbed, like we're absolutely doing everything we're supposed to be doing. You know, it's
Gotcha.
very, you know, very like a selfish mode of moving through. Art is extremely important, and I'm an artist, obviously, but I think when we make art that is specific to place, we kind of highlight things that desperately need to be highlighted. And I think bringing it to a place like Art Week is a good platform for that kind of content.
And then when you say brackish water, is it just dirty looking water, or are you actually getting really disgusting water?
Well, when I've performed this piece once before. I performed this piece at the Queeramics Symposium at Louisiana State University in 2019. And the water access that I had was through their ceramics department, and the water just looked really cloudy and gross because it had come out of these pipes that were really like coppery. And I was like, ooh, that's really fascinating. And since then I've been using water that I've pulled straight out of like rivers and out of the Iowa water system, so they look absolutely gnarly. At the gallery that we're going to be at, I'm presuming that it's not going to be as dirty because of just what I have access to, but and probably what the curator would prefer. But I am probably going to mix some of the materials together to give it that illusion, but I don't think it's like the most necessary thing because the message is pretty overwhelmingly clear.
Do you, so your ceramics, can you see straight through it to see the water, or do you break them so the water floods out?
Yeah, so I actually, so these big pillar-like things, they're stoneware, so they are colored to match the house that I have floating in the space. And I basically pour out water in the spot that they are standing until I can lift them. And then I move them through the space and I start to eradicate these hard lines that I've made with the sand rings, kind of to convey multiple meanings there, but these very shifty and like liminal ideas that we have about our own safety and these systems that we have in place that will protect us, quote unquote, are so easily and quickly eradicated by not that much force, really. And at Louisiana State, the sand that I had used came from all of these sandbags that they had from a recent hurricane. So I'm hoping that I can sort of locally source in a similar way at Art Week. I don't know if I will have the ability to, but the hope is that it can come from a similar source. So it's not just, so it has that kind of meaning as well, but we shall see what I have access to. Someone somewhere has sandbags, I'm sure.
Yeah,
In Miami.
down there. Are you driving there or are you flying?
Oh, I'm driving.
Okay.
I'm driving all the way, baby.
Because you have all your ceramic and stoneware and stuff, right?
Yeah, so from where I live in Wisconsin to the hotel that I got, it says it's 21 hours. I'm gonna bet it's like more 25 with like breaks and stopping and stuff. But I love a good long distance. This last summer, I did a pretty big pilgrimage throughout Iowa for my 100 Days project, where I went to many different sites. So I really love being alone in the car. I know it's not the most efficient way to travel, but I really do love a good long road trip. I think you really learn about yourself on the road, but not to be too like Jack Kerouac about that. But I also think, you know, you never see the country when you fly. And I really love to see the really strong shift between spaces as you like move through the country. So.
Do you listen to music, or are you just silently in your car, or are you a podcast?
Daniel needs a visual of your driving experience.
I listen to audiobooks primarily. I try to, it's so silly. I try to like get through all of the audiobooks that I have been like avoiding pointedly because the narrator bothers me, or like, you know, I know I need to listen to this book and be like fully immersed in this book, but I can't stand how it's being read. And so I try to like, I put them on like 2 times speed and I listen to them as I like careen through. And if I get really irritated, I usually switch to music. But and I do listen to some podcasts, but usually I'm trying to just like eat through these books that I have told myself you need to listen to this, and I've put off.
Nice.
Samuel and I both listen to audiobooks, so we totally understand a bad narrator just ruining the whole experience of listening.
Exactly. And you're like, I need to listen to this because I need to be an informed person. But good Lord. Who hired
What do you say? For the love of God? For the love of God.
Truly, like it is that times 10, 100%.
I have a hard time if I listen to it 2 times speed. There's a lot of times I daydream, so I'll be driving and then I'll be like, oh yeah, I'm supposed to be listening. And then I'm like, I don't have no clue what we're listening to anymore.
Yeah. And, you know, some authors are like they write so luminously. They have this like, incandescent way of writing. And then they are the ones reading it and you're like, no, you should have hired someone. You're killing my experience of your words by you saying them. So I'm always surprised by the choices that are made there. I wonder how much choice some of those folks have, but whatever.
It's probably cheaper for them to do it themselves.
Right, or they think they can bring something magical to the experience if they read it themselves, but seldom is that the case.
Has your work always focused on the environment, or is this a new focus because we're having such global issues with global warming?
That's a good question. So when I was an undergrad, I became really kind of obsessive about the crisis that we are facing, to a point where it was like making me ill. As if you kind of like research something too much, you'll perhaps be a little bit ill over it, especially if it's something as doom-ridden as our climate crisis. But I was making all of this work that was very ecocentric. I took this class with a really amazing professor named Angela Waseska, called Eco House. And every aspect of that class, it was a performance based class, but we were creating work in relation to systemic issues related to the environment. And I was really in love with that. I was studying ontomedia really intensely at the time, as someone who was also based in Iowa, who really informed and influenced my work. But I also, at the same time as that, I was studying ethics and religion. I have like an unofficial minor in ethics and religions, because getting that BA in art history, I realized very quickly, oh, I know nothing about religion. I better go and learn about that, so that I can contextualize all of this art history, which kind of sucked me down this rabbit hole. I was taking this religions and environmental ethics course as well, which really kind of was blowing my mind about these different religious ideas and ideologies regarding stewardship and what ought to be done and what doing good and being good actually looks like in practice within these different faith branches. But that being said, in undergrad, like so many young 20-somethings, I was really like in it and going through it as a young person, trying to sort out my own shit, and I really needed to hunker down and create work about this intense experience that I was having, trying to figure out like who I was and what I needed to be, and like what did I want to create, what do I want to create moving forward, but also what is this space of like constantly just enduring and white knuckling it through the academic process, and not just the academic process, but like being a person in the world. And so I made these really huge installations kind of in the vein of Judy Chicago's The Dinner Party. There were these huge tile floors that I had hand pressed and hand painted. And I trained for really brilliant performance artists to sing and to perform my work. And that took like 4 months of training, mostly so that they could sustain vocal performance for long periods of time.
When you say train, like you're training them to sing, or?
Yeah, well, it's kind of a combination of like training them to be confident to make loud, not maybe into noise, like for long periods of time. And my practice is durational. So usually the performances are about 2 hours, 2 to 4 hours is usually my range. And training someone to be able to sustain the same like line from a hymn for 2 hours as they slowly rise and fall in time with this hymn that they're singing all in conjunction. It's a lot of like build up. You can't just go and do that, because proper vocal performance is using a lot of your stomach and a lot of your like chest and nothing up in your throat, otherwise you'll go hoarse. And so it's really easy to like make yourself ill doing that. So it's a lot of like build up and being able to slowly fall down for 2 hours. It takes a lot of getting accustomed to it and getting there. And these artists that I trained were already brilliant to begin with, because they already went through that same program at UNI, which has a really amazing undergraduate performance program. I would argue, I've never seen anything of its like. It's just so robust, and the students who come through are always a little bit like, what is this? Because they're from Iowa and they don't know, but it's just truly an amazing program. It's really headed by this professor named April Thompson. And she, when I was an undergrad, she was April Piepert, but she has this way of like shaping young students into just really powerful powerhouse performance artists who really like pull from the gut. And so those students had come through that program and they were ready to kind of throw whatever I threw at them. And then after that, I went back to my roots in a way where I was really dealing with the environment, because I felt like I had kind of like figured some of my shit out. It was like, okay, I can, now that I've dealt with and really like explored like what is this interpersonal stuff that I'm working with, I can really address these larger issues that I think, again, are like deeply personal. Like, what is my personal obligations here? Like, what is my role and what am I supposed to be individually doing to kind of push forward a momentum for climate justice? And like, what does that look like? As well as like the universal aspect of that is like, what are all of our responsibilities here? Like, what can we all mobilize to do? And what can my art practice do in order to elevate that content?
And then because we've been talking about the 100-day challenge, what is that exactly? Because I have no idea.
Yeah, so the 100 days is a project that I've been working on. This is going to be the third year that I'm doing it. It starts again on January 1st. And the 100 days is something that I've been doing where for 100 days of the year, I perform every single day and I document it every single day. And the first year that I did it, it was sort of under this guise of like performance a day, like I'll perform every day and I'll figure something out. It was at the very onset of the pandemic, and I was trying to desperately figure out how to maintain a really strong studio practice. I was in a ceramics residency at the time, and all of us kind of lost access to the studio because we went into shutdown. And so I was like, what does my practice look like now moving forward, since I can't be doing what I sort of set out to do? And it was just this way to kind of keep my finger on the pulse of my practice and to figure out what it is that I was interested in doing. And they were just exercises. But then halfway through the first edition of it, I was like, oh, I see what I'm doing. I keep going to Ana Mendieta's grave and I keep looking at her tombstone and talking to her. I keep going to all of these really rural grave sites and being fascinated by the fact that these unproductive spaces are still cared for by the city or the municipality that it belongs to. I'm really interested in these natural spaces that have started to erode, that somehow don't get cared for. I'm really fascinated by these lines of convergence that I am now seeing towards the end. And I think of that first 100 days, maybe 5 of them were really good performances, which is great odds, by the way. Like, that's really great. And I was like, this was so fruitful, and I learned so much about how I document work and what I like to see and what actually is of interest to me. I didn't know until I make it. I think that's like a Joan Didion line, like, I don't know what I'm thinking until I write it, or something to that effect. And then the second edition of the 100 days I did 2021. And it was this really weird bridge. I had to break it up almost into 2 sections because I had to move in the middle of it. One of the awful downsides of the Derecho is losing all of that tree canopy means all of the animals that usually roost in the tree canopy suddenly were looking for places to roost, and 93% of people had roof damage. So me and everybody else had bat infestations. So I had to move very suddenly in the midst of the 100 days. Not pleasant, but whatever.
Sounds awful.
It was really awful. It was really kind of iconic though, because we got this U-Haul, and you know how on the U-Hauls they have like all of the different animal prints from like different regions of the country. The U-Haul that we got was covered in bats. And I was
It's just such an odd choice.
I know. And I was just like, and I had just like I was a barista at the time. And like the last tip out that I got had on the coins, they had bats. And I was like, what is going on? This is truly like me shouting to the sky, for the love of God, what is going on? It was fierce. Anywho's. So I finished the 100 days in Wisconsin, where I live now. I live like right next to Madison, not right in Madison. But I had spent so much of the last 100 days, instead of performing every single day, I was doing material research, and I was doing a lot of deep research into my family. The 100 days has become this interesting investigation of my matrilineal line. And I've been looking at the history of the women in my family all the way back to my grandmother's grandmother. Her name is Anna Jakobina Peterson, and she immigrated to the United States in 1886 from Denmark. And my cousin is a news anchor for CNN. And in 2014, CNN was doing this series called like My Roots, and they did a whole special on Anna. And I've always been really fascinated by this like matriarch in my family who like established my family in Iowa and is kind of like both revered and very disliked. And she's a really fascinating character to me, especially knowing like she would hate me and that we would not get along, but I'm really fascinated by her. She's like a very hard-hearted Christian woman who was determined to make good at like any cost to like her family relations. And I knew that she had settled in Council Bluffs, which is like right next to Omaha in Iowa. And it used to be called Little Denmark. It was such a Danish area. And so through all of this research, I found like census records and voting records and marriage certificates and all that. And I found out where her husband had built their home. I found the church that she had attended for 72 years in Iowa. She lived to be way too old, like 92 or something. All of the women in my family live way too long, which is haunting for me.
Yeah, good genes, I guess. You'll plan for 92.
Those strong Danish genes, baby. Just too long. But I found all of this information, and then I found her daughter's grave site and where she had lived, and I found the homes that my grandmother had lived in as a child and the 2 homes she owned as an adult. And in the last 5 days of the 100 days, I basically cut clear across Iowa to go to all of those places, and I documented all of those places, and I made a film about it, as you do, about just this journey and moving through space and really seeing how kind of absolutely freaky it is that the Iowa that I live in is fundamentally a different Iowa than Anna. When Anna arrived in Iowa, Iowa had like 2 major like removal like projects of the prairie. Originally it was about 87% prairie. And prior to Anna, like pre-Anna, is how I think of it. There was like one major sweep of removal because everyone was colonizing the space, basically. When she arrived, it was about 57, 56% prairie. And in my lifetime, it's less than 0.1% prairie, like 0.1, not even a full percent. And that's not even 140 years of time to eradicate several millennia of biodiverse prairie systems. And so the 100 days has kind of become this documentation of my matrilineal line and the strange and complex intergenerational trauma of the women in my family in these desperate attempts to make good, and how that system that they are products of is the same system that completely eradicated and destroyed the prairie in my home state, and how those lines of convergence seem kind of separate, but they are not at all. They're the same system. And the privileges of my family to be able to do that is predicated on mass violence, right? And land use and abuse and genocide. But that's the same system of exploitation, and it's the same system of like make good and be productive at any cost in order to make good, but like no one really makes good at the end of the day because it leaves destruction and abuse at the end. So it's turned into that. It starts again on January 1st, and I'm going to be documenting basically the production of the next huge projects that are about that research.
That's really deep.
I
Start and
Yeah,
then
it's kind of a downer.
Well, and I wish we had more time because there's so many facets of your practice that you could just spend so much time talking about. That it's just fascinating. I don't, not to hate on all the artists that we've had, but a lot of you're definitely an intellect in the way that you're thinking about work. Like I call myself a conceptual artist, and usually I have like a couple lines of this is what my art's about. But you're like, you can tell that you've just thought about this and you let the process develop to the point where then it lends itself to more. And it's just very interesting.
You almost need a whiteboard with a whole bunch of like lines
It's like
kind
that
of check
meme.
out.
Yeah, it's like that meme of the guy with the cigarette hanging out of his mouth, and he's like pointing to like all these intersecting like bubbles with the line. Like that's me talking about my work. 100%.
Which is really interesting. It's so fascinating.
Thank you.
I have so many questions for you that I don't know where to start, and we're almost at time. So I'm gonna let Samuel ask a question.
So I have a question. Just one. How do you feel personally? Because you kind of talked about it a little bit, but I know you talked about how you wouldn't get along, or like you two wouldn't see eye to eye.
Yeah.
Do you think that if this is, because she sounds like a strong woman, if she was born today, would she have the same ideas that are from the past, or would she have more of your mindset?
I don't know. The thing about research like this and gathering stories from all of the women who are still alive who knew Anna personally, is that she is 100%. The reason that she was so hard. I talk about her in present tense because I'm thinking about her all the time. But part of the reason that she was the way that she was is because of the really painful background that she came from. She immigrated to the United States because her father was a stonebreaker. And there's evidence of like documented evidence of him receiving welfare because he was so poor. Being a stonebreaker in the 1880s was like the lowest like labor position you could hold. It's not educated labor. It's 100% just like working and working and working. And a lot of the things that I think about with her and about people in general is like when you learn about the really horrific things that have happened to them, it doesn't excuse their really horrible behavior, but it makes sense. And the number of stories I've been told about her being sold to her neighbors at the age of 4 as like cheap labor to collect like goose eggs, and being alone to go and do that, and being knocked down by geese and having like wings beating against her and just absolutely beating her up to a pulp as like a 4-year-old, and her screaming for her mother and no one coming. And then I hear about how she exploited all of her cousins and nephews and nieces as an older person as cheap labor. I'm like, well, I don't think that it's like it, like you do what you know. And I don't know. I mean, I think the reason that she was the way she was is because she lived in a time where you could really easily get away with that kind of stuff. And she had that done to her. And so she just kind of continued to do it because that's what you did. But I don't know. I think if she was, I would pray that if she was around today, she would be someone who understands why behavior like that is not acceptable, mostly because I don't think she would have had those things happen to her. But I don't know. I mean, I think her mother or her grandmother was alive at the same time as like Søren Kierkegaard in the same area of Denmark. So clearly not everyone had those thoughts and ideas at that time. So I can't really say she's just a product of her time. But again, I don't know. I mean, it's hard to like suspend someone out of their time period, I think.
Exactly. What about, so you've talked about having like a Methodist hymn that, are you Methodist?
It's complicated. So my family is deeply Lutheran, deeply Danish Lutheran. But my grandfather, my grandmother's husband, who passed away in 2018, he was born and raised Methodist and converted, but always said he was a Methodist his lifelong in his heart. And when he passed away, I started attending Methodist services, and I'm not baptized and I'm not a Christian, but I love a Methodist service because it's just singing in unison. And so much of the Methodist ideology is doing good and being good. And it's really in those services it's only in those services that I have ever felt like there is an actual idea of being good to each other, but also we need to be paying attention to what is happening outside of these walls, because it doesn't mean anything if you're good in here and you're horrible out there, or not helping your neighbor out there. And the Methodist church that I attend right now is definitely the most progressive and strange church I've ever attended. All of the pronouns surrounding God have been changed to they, them, or if the service and the sermon is about someone in particular, like, or a group of individuals in particular, like, for example, like trans youth or something, the pronouns for God reflect the people who need to be centered in the conversation. The previous pastor had like a PhD in feminist theory and like liberation politics or something like that. So it's a really special congregation. I will never convert, but I definitely love going.
So this is another kind of a more crazy question. Have you ever thought about getting like a medium and like talking to your grandma?
I have had that suggested to me. I don't want to talk to her.
Okay.
But because I guess this is why So
Because she
I'm,
sounds mean.
well, no,
And she'll
so,
say mean things.
well, so I'm a lesbian, and I am a young progressive person. I look forward at the same time as looking back. I don't need to talk to someone who I know is homophobic and I know who is rooted in tradition to the point of like their detriment, and who is not interested in like women becoming, even though that's like exactly what she did. Like she's not interested in that conversation, you know, or she wouldn't have been. She's dead. But but at the same time too, though, it's enough for me to look at photos of her in her 70s and 80s and see how kind of frighteningly similar she looks to my grandmother, who is still living. And how when I look at photos of my grandmother at the same age I am now, I look frighteningly like her. And like, that's enough for me to be like, that's some spooky kind of witch magic happening right there. That is 140 years is a long time, and it is no time at all. And it's interesting to be like, I feel connected to her just by looking at photographs of all three of us.
And you're planning on going to Denmark, right? I was reading in like 2022, you have a trip planned?
Yeah, so I have, this kind of came out of the fact that I have a solo show in Berlin that keeps moving back and moving back and moving back because of the pandemic. It was originally scheduled in like 2020, and here we are in 2022. But I am going to the town that my grandmother's grandmother was born in. The church that she was baptized in is still standing. It was like, I think that church was established in like 1146 or something like that. It's one of the oldest standing churches in Denmark or something. And I'm going there with the help of one of my professors, who's going to connect me with some colleagues of his in Copenhagen. It's right outside of Copenhagen, to kind of navigate, because I speak a teeny bit of Danish, but like not enough to get by, and definitely not enough to communicate like, hey, I'm looking for some baptism records from 1862. Like, you know, it's not going to work. So I'm going there, and the school that Anna attended is now a historical site, and so I'm going to go look at that. And then the area that she grew up in, there's like historical cottages that are like preserved, like landmark cottages or something like that. I'm not exactly sure because the website is fully in Danish. But I'm going to go and look at those and document that as well.
And would this documentation be a part of the 100 Days series?
I think it's a continuation of it. The reason that it is 100 days is because I am referencing Marilyn Arsam's 100 Ways to Tell Time. And within 100 days, like, how many different ways can I communicate time passing, but also, again, looking forward while looking back, and seeking something better and looking to the future, while also looking over my shoulder and seeing why things are as they are now. And especially in my own family, which is the microcosm, I suppose, but fully representative of a larger thing.
Before we let you go, because we've had you for 40 plus minutes, and I would just sit here and talk to you forever. One thing I wanted to ask you about your work is, because it's durational, do you have a hard time with people, with viewers, understanding your work, or like spending that time that your work needs to really understand what the concepts and what you're trying to say is? I've had that issue in my own work, so I was very interested in your perspective on that.
Yeah, I think it's really hard to hold an audience captive, I think, for really long periods of time without them feeling burdened by your work, you know? and not in like a bad way. They just kind of go like, oh, they look at their watch, they check their phone, and they're like, I want to be here for this, but I need to go and do this other thing, or I want to see this work that's happening at the same time, and I feel bad. One of the amazing things about my undergraduate program was that we had this thing called Vertigo, which was this 2-hour durational performance night where all of these different performances were happening at the same time, for multiple hours, some for only 30 minutes, some longer. And it was through that I started to understand like how audience members really like sit with a performance. And I also learned this really interesting, I don't want to call it a trick because it's not, but like something that I use in my practice all the time, which is when you move really slowly and it seems like a lot of time is passing, but not much really is, people sit with you longer. And I don't really need someone to sit with me the whole time to really understand my work. It's in fact preferable to me that they kind of come and come back. Like they go and they are like coming back and they're like, how's it going? And to me, I think that's totally fine. It's harder when I have time constraints, like I can only perform for 40 minutes and like I have to make like a beginning, a middle, and an end, and make it so that each punctuation of those like points of the performance makes it so that they are invested enough to stay for the full 40 minutes. If I'm performing for 2 hours straight, not much changes. There's clearly a beginning, a middle, and an end, but they get more time to like kind of come in and out. But I don't know. I think there's something about like really moody lighting and kind of singing and moving almost like I don't want to say like in a witchy way, but moving in a way that feels very ceremonial and in a way that like is supposed to be intoxicating. It's really fabulous to sort of cast a net and a spell over people and encourage them to stay. And it always feels really special when people stay with me. And usually I'm so in it that I don't really notice when they come and go. I just know like that there's another presence kind of there watching. So I don't know. I find it very hard though. I find it distracting when people are really loud about their comings and goings. I wish they would just kind of sneak through, but often I think people think that when you're performing, for some reason they think like you can't hear them or see them.
Yeah.
Which is really funny to me because I'm like, I'm right here. I'm literally right here. I can hear everything you're saying. I can hear you. Mm-hmm. Don't worry. Your commentary is noted. So, yeah.
Well, if someone's trying to find you, where's the best place to go?
Yeah, so as long as you remember my name, you can find me. My website is www.caitlinmarymargarett.com. My Instagram is Caitlin_Mary_Margaret. And my email is caitlinmarymargarett@gmail.com. So as long as you remember my name, I think you can find me.
I like the consistency.
Yeah. Consistency is key.
Well, thank you. If you guys are in Miami Beach, Saturday, December, I had it. I'm failing. 4th.
Oh, 4th. Dang it. Close.
Saturday, December 4th, at 2:00, Caitlin will be performing. So you can get tickets online to see her. Is it a 45-minute performance or an hour performance?
Yeah. It's about 40 minutes, I think. So.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for spending the time with us.
Thank you for letting me talk about many topics.
I would love to have you on again. I feel like I'm going to re-listen to this a few times and then have way more questions for you. So if you're game, I would love to have like part 2.
Next time Katie has you, the whiteboard's going to be filled with a whole bunch of different things she's going to ask you.
I'll be in my studio and I'll be like, here's a graph. Don't worry. So yeah, I'm excited to see you perform as well.
Are you there the whole week or?
Yeah.
Okay.
I was like, I've never been to Miami. I need to go and check it out. I've never been to Art Week, so I wanted the full experience.
Very cool. Well, I look forward to meeting you in person. Samuel's coming with me to help me out, so we'll be there and enjoying Art Week too. So
you'll see me in my cool Miss Art World assistant shirt.
Lovely.
Should have got you a little tank top, Samuel, so you could just be rocking the Miami vibe.
I could. Then we could have bedazzled it.
Yes.
It would have been great.
That'd be fabulous.
All right. Well, have a great rest of your day. Oh, I forgot about us. Thank you always for listening. You can listen wherever you find your podcast. You can also, if you want to see us talk to each other in little boxes, check out our YouTube channel at Miss Art World. We have our Instagram page that is always kept up to date. So check us out. Throw us a follow if you're on there. And also on Facebook too. Anywhere you want to find us, we're probably there, except for TikTok. So don't look for us there.
And you know what? Before we leave, Grandma, since you watch all of these and have complaints about how I look half the time, I want to know how many times I drink something. So if you want to count that up for me and just send me a total count, that'd be great.
Grandma will like this episode because our family's from Iowa. So I don't know, where does she live? Do you know? Atumwa? Yeah. So she's out there. So she will very much enjoy this episode.
Shout out to my Iowans.
Yeah. All right. Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.